Hi there, and welcome to this lesson. In this lesson, we'll be learning about quadratic equations, and under quadratic equations, we're learning the factorization method. Okay, and it's a very simple, very simple, straightforward principle, and we'll get to all of it in a sec. Now, as the lesson progresses, if you have any issues at all, please feel free to get in touch. You can do so via the course dashboard. Okay, and I'd remind you to set the video to play in 1080p HD. You can do so via the setting icon on the bottom right. Okay, so let's jump right into the lesson. Now, quadratic equations. Okay, what are quadratic equations? Now, to understand quadratic equations, we need to know what quadratic expressions are. Okay, now what is a quadratic expression? Now, quadratic expression is an algebraic expression of the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are constants. And when I say constants, I mean numbers. Okay, you have x here as a variable, and you have a, b, and c as constants, i.e. numbers. For example, you can have x squared plus 3x minus 4. Okay, and in this case, a is 1. Okay, we have 1x squared, was written as x squared, and b is 3, and c is minus 4. Okay, so we have a, b, and c as our numbers, and we have x in this case as our variable. Similarly, we have x squared minus 7x plus 11. Now these are algebraic expressions. Now, when a quadratic expression, sorry, these are quadratic expressions. Now, when a quadratic expression is equated to a constant, i.e. any number, it becomes a quadratic equation. For example, you could have that x squared plus 3x minus 4 equals 7. This is a quadratic equation. You could also have that x squared minus 7x plus 11 equals 2. This is another quadratic equation. Now, when a quadratic equation is equated to 0, it becomes solvable. For a quadratic equation to be solvable, it must be equated to 0. So anytime you're given a quadratic equation where that isn't equated to 0, you basically move the constant from the right to the left, i.e. in this case you have x squared plus 3x minus 4 equals 7. If I move that 7 over to the left, it becomes minus 7, and what I have in the end is I have x squared plus 3x minus 11 equals 0. Okay, now when you have this equated to 0, it becomes solvable. Now I can solve this quadratic equation. Similarly, you have x squared minus 7x plus 11 equals 2. I move that 2 over to the left, it becomes minus 2, and then I have x squared minus 7x plus 9 equals 0 as my solvable equation. It's a very simple process. Basically, when you have a quadratic equation that is not equated to 0, before you can attempt solving it, you need to have that equation equated to 0 by moving the constant from the right over to the left. Okay, let's move on. Now, there are three main methods for solving quadratic equations, and these are the factorization method, the completing the square method, and finally we have the formula method. Okay, and in this lesson we will be talking about the factorization method. So, the factorization method. Now, I'm going to explain this to you using some very short simple steps. I need you to watch very closely. Okay, I need to follow me very closely as I do this. Now, the first thing we're going to do, consider the expansion of the algebraic expression. Okay, so we want to expand something. We have x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4. Okay, x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4. Now, to do this, basically, this is a very simple process. X minus 3 multiplying x minus 4, you basically have x multiplying x minus 4. Okay, so maybe you take the x from the x minus 3, multiply that with x minus 4, and then have minus 3 multiplied by x minus 4. Okay, simply x from the x minus 3, we have x multiplying x minus 4, and then we have the minus 3 multiplying x minus 4. Is that simple? And then when you expand that out, you'd have x multiplying x minus 4, you have x squared minus 4x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4, you have minus 3x minus 12. Okay, and then when you simplify that out, you have x squared minus 7x plus 12. Okay, now I need you to note that. Okay, so we've expanded x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4, and we ended up with x squared minus 7x plus 12. Okay, now consider the quadratic equation. X squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0. Okay, x squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0. Okay, now how do we go about solving this quadratic equation? Now, if you look back at the expansion we just did, we're able to identify that x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4 is the same as x squared minus 7x plus 12. Okay, so it will tell us that x minus x squared, if you have a quadratic equation, x squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0, you could write that out as x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4 equals 0. Okay, that's all you need to know for now. Okay, very simple. Now, here's something else to consider. When you multiply 2 times 0, you get 0. When you multiply 0 times 2, you get 0. Now I want you to think, are there any two numbers, let's say you multiply 2 times 4 or 4 times 5, any two numbers that you can multiply that do not include 0 that will give you a result 0? No, it's impossible. The only way you would get a result 0 when you multiply two numbers is if one of them is 0. You can't multiply two non-zero numbers to give you 0. One of the numbers has to be 0 to give you 0. Okay, very simple. That's something to consider. Now let's apply this to solving this quadratic equation, because we're able to establish that quadratic equation x squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0 could be written as x minus 3 x minus 4 equals 0. Now let's apply this principle that we just learned to solving this. Now if you have x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4 to give you 0, the only way that this is possible, you have one thing multiplying another to give you 0, is if one of them is 0. I.e., if you have that x minus 3 equals 0, and then you have that x equals 3, or you have that x minus 4 equals 0, and you have that x equals 4. Now, this is a very vague idea of how you would go about solving a quadratic equation using the factorization method. Okay, and the first thing we understood that when you have a quadratic equation, x squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0, you can actually write this out in a factorized form, okay, as x minus 3 x minus 4 equals 0. And once you have x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4 equals 0, it's pretty much straightforward from there. You just have that one of them has to be 0, and you have that x minus 3 equals 0, x equals 3, or x minus 4 equals 0, x equals 4. But then, how do you go from the point x squared, because at this point you were basically given x minus 3 x minus 4, but when you're given a quadratic equation, you'll be given the quadratic equation as it is. So how do you get from this point x squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0 to x minus 3x multiplying x minus 4 equals 0? Now that is what we would cover shortly, and we'll be using an example to do just that. Now, example 1. Using the factorization method, solve the quadratic equation x squared minus x minus 6 equals 0. Okay, so we're going to break this down, and we're going to do so using 6 short simple steps. Okay, now step 1. The first thing we want to do here is we want to multiply the first term x squared and the last term minus 6. Okay, so you have minus 6 multiplied by x squared, and what you have is minus 6x squared. Simple. That's the first thing you want to do. Now, step 2. The next thing you want to do is you want to look for two terms. Okay, first you identify the factors of minus 6x squared, i.e., what are the things that minus 6x squared can be divided by. We have x, we have 2x, we have minus 2x, we have 3x, we have minus 3x, we have 6x, we have minus 6x. And now We need to identify 2 out of these factors that will obviously multiply to give minus 6x squared. We need to get a pair, and when you add them up, you will get that middle term, and the middle term in this case is minus x. Okay, so we have, when we identify these 2 terms, you have them as minus 3x and 2x, because when you add these together, minus 3x plus 2x, you get minus x, and when you multiply them, minus 3x multiplied by 2x, you get our result from step 1, minus 6x squared. Okay, so the next step, step 3. The next thing we want to do now is we want to substitute the sum of the 2 terms we obtained from step 2, i.e. minus x and minus 6, minus 3x and 2x. We want to substitute these into our equation, because from step 2 we've established that minus 3x plus 2x is minus x. We want to put this back into the equation for minus x, our middle term in the equation. So we'll go ahead and do that, and what we have, you have x squared minus x minus 6 equals 0, and what you have is you have x squared. When you bring the 2 terms together and put them in place of minus x, and you have x squared minus 3x plus 2x minus 6 equals 0. Okay, that's step 3. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to group these terms. Okay, so we write that down again. So we have x squared minus 3x plus 2x minus 6 equals 0, and we want to group these in 2's. Okay, so we have one bracket x squared minus 3x and another bracket 2x minus 6. Okay, and then the next thing we want to do is we want to factorize this simply. Okay, so we're going to factorize the first bracket using x. We have x common there, and we have x into bracket x minus 3, and then we'll factorize the second bracket, and we have 2 into x minus 3. Okay, and at this point, here's what we do. You have x with the 2 numbers you have x plus 2 and x minus 3. So you have x minus 3 multiplying x plus 2. Or if you really want to understand what's going on here, you're basically factorizing with x minus 3. Okay, but just so it's not too confusing, just take the 2 terms you have outside the bracket. So we have x and plus 2, you put it in the bracket x plus 2, and then take the terms in the bracket x minus 3, and what you have is x plus 2 x minus 3. Okay, and what we've simply done now, if we simply factorized the quadratic expression in our equation to a point where we have 2 things multiplying each other, and at this point I believe you know what to do now. So we have that x minus 3, step 5, x minus 3 equals 0, or x plus 2 equals 0. You have that x equals minus 2, and you have that x minus 3 equals 0. You have that x equals 3, and that is how you solve a quadratic equation using the factorization method. It's very simple, very straightforward. You pretty much just need to understand the steps. Okay, so there are 3 steps, or 4 steps, sorry, you need to apply to get from the original quadratic equation to the factorized form of the quadratic equation, where you have 2 things in a bracket multiplying each other. And once you get to that point, you're safe through. It's very, very simple moving forward. So let's try another example. So we have example 2, and example 2 says, using the factorization method, solve the quadratic equation 2x squared minus 7x plus 3 equals 0. And we'll do so with our steps again. So we have step 1. The first thing we want to do here is we want to multiply 2x squared and 3. Okay, so the first term and the last term, and basically you have that 3 multiplied line 2x, where you have 6x squared. And then the next thing you want to do is we want to find 2 terms that will multiply. Okay, in this case we have plus 7x, not minus 7x like I said before. So we want to find 2 terms that will multiply, to give us our result from step 1, 6x squared. And when we add them together, we get 7x, our middle term. So you find that these are 6x and x. Okay, because when you add 6x and x, you get 7x, and when you multiply, you get 6x squared. You basically need to identify all the factors of 6x squared. Okay, so you start with x, you have 2x, you have 3x, you have 6x, and then you have minus x is also a factor. You have minus 2x, minus 3x, and minus 6x, and then you start trying between all of them which two out of all the factors you multiply to get your answer from step 1, and when you add them together you get your middle term 7x. Okay, now the next thing we want to do, because from step 2 we've established that 6x plus x equals 7x, we're simply going to put 6x plus x for 7x in our equation. Okay, so step 3, we have 2x squared plus 7x plus 3 equals 0. Now we're going to put 6x plus x, we're going to replace 7x with 6x plus x. Okay, so you have 2x squared plus 6x plus x plus 3 equals 0. And then step 4. Now step 4, we'll write that down again. 2x squared plus 6x plus x plus 3 equals 0. And then we group these in 2's. Okay, and we have 2x squared plus 6x in one bracket, and we have x plus 3 in another bracket. Okay, and then we're going to factorize each of the brackets. Okay, so we have 2x squared plus 6x, we have 2x common there, so we can factorize using 2x, and what we have is 2x, x plus 3. Okay, and then we have x plus 3, we just factorize using 1, because we always have to factorize. Okay, and you factorize using 1, and you also still end up with x plus 3. Okay, and now you basically just take the two terms or two